Hello, my friends. Before we start, remember to like, comment, and subscribe for more horror content. I didn't intend to stay long in Cedar Hollow. Truthfully, I hadn't intended to stay at all. The town was one of those places that didn't show up on most maps, the kind of place you drove past thinking you might stop for gas or a cup of coffee, only to realize hours later that you'd gone through it without noticing. I was on my way to a research project in Vermont, driving through Maine, when my car broke down, forcing me to spend the night. It was late, nearly midnight, and I was tired, cranky, and desperate for a place to crash. The only motel was a small, faded building on the edge of town, its neon sign flickering in erratic bursts. The clerk, a thin man with pale skin and dark, too sharp eyes, barely looked at me as he handed over the keys. "Room 7, he said, voice hollow. "Enjoy your stay." I should have left then. I should have kept driving, even if it meant walking to the next town in the middle of the night. But something, I don't know what, made me stay. The room was small, cramped, and smelled faintly of mildew and old cigarettes. I unpacked my bag, stretched, and tried to ignore the unease creeping up my spine. I was exhausted, and I convinced myself that the feeling of being watched was just the anxiety of traveling alone. I slept fitfully, waking more than once to the creaking of the floorboards and the faint scratching sound coming from the walls. The next morning, I stepped outside. Cedar Hollow looked normal in the daylight, quaint houses with peeling paint, a diner with faded red awnings, streets lined with tall oaks. A few locals moved slowly, glancing at me briefly before turning away. There was a silence to the town, a stillness that wasn't just quiet. It was deliberate, like the air itself was holding its breath. I wandered the streets trying to pass the time while waiting for a mechanic. I noticed the same odd things over and over. Doors left slightly ajar, windows that should have been locked standing open, and an unnatural absence of children. Where were the children? It was almost noon, and the streets should have been alive with laughter, yet there was only the occasional dog barking and the hum of an old truck engine. That night, when I returned to the motel, things started to go wrong. It began subtly. A knock at the door around 2 a.m., soft, deliberate. I checked and the hallway was empty. Then the whispers began. At first I thought they were coming from the air vents, faint murmurs, almost indistinguishable. But soon I realized they were calling my name. Ethan. Ethan. It was slow, deliberate, echoing in my head and in the empty room simultaneously. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and saw the shadows move. Not the normal, mundane kind that the flicker of a streetlight makes, but shadows that twisted and bent unnaturally, almost like they were alive. I couldn't stay in that room any longer. I packed my things and tried to leave, but the streets of Cedar Hollow seemed unfamiliar in the dark. The layout had shifted. I recognized no road, no street sign, and the forest surrounding the town pressed closer than it had in daylight. Then I saw it. A figure standing at the edge of the trees. Tall, impossibly thin, entirely black, with a head that tilted in ways that defied anatomy. Its gaze, if you could call it that, felt like it pierced straight through me. I ran, the gravel crunching under my feet, until I made it back to the motel. The next day, I sought answers. I went back to the diner, hoping to talk to someone. Carol, the waitress, served me coffee with a polite smile, but her hands shook slightly. When I asked her about the town, about the missing people, about the figure in the woods, she leaned in and whispered, "You shouldn't have seen it. You shouldn't have been here. It notices, and once it notices, there's no leaving." I laughed nervously. Of course, this was a small town with superstitious people. They believed in ghosts and monsters. I told myself that, and for a moment, it comforted me. But that night, the whispers returned, louder, clearer. I could hear words I didn't understand, sentences formed in a language that seemed older than the town itself. I could feel the walls breathing, closing in, pressing against me from all sides. The motel room became a cage. Items moved on their own. My bag shifted, the phone slid across the nightstand, the blankets twisted around my body while I slept, or tried to sleep. I felt something brush my leg, soft, deliberate, leaving a chill in its wake. My dreams were worse. I dreamed of the figure in the forest standing over me, stretching impossibly, growing taller with each passing night, and always, always watching. I tried leaving again. I ran to the car and started the engine, determined to drive until I reached another town, another state, anywhere but here. But the roads of Cedar Hollow seemed endless. Curves appeared where they shouldn't, intersections led back to the same streets, and the forest loomed, dark and suffocating. I began to understand that the town itself was alive, a presence that watched and manipulated. It could twist reality, bend space, and it had claimed me. I began noticing subtle changes in the townspeople. Their eyes followed me too long, then darted away. Their smiles were too wide, too slow to fade. There were people who never blinked, never spoke, yet were always there, watching, measuring. I realized then that the town was patient. It didn't attack outright. It waited, learned, and it fed on fear. One night I ventured into the forest, desperate to confront the source of my terror. The trees seemed taller than they should, their shadows long and curling like fingers. The figure appeared almost immediately, stepping from behind an ancient oak, perfectly still, its faceless head tilting as it studied me. "You cannot leave," it said. The voice was in my head, but also in the space around me. My own thoughts felt like echoes. What are you?" I stammered. "You belong here," it said. The words sank into me like icy water. I stumbled backward, falling, and when I looked up, the forest had vanished. I was standing in the middle of the town, lights flickering, shadows pooling in corners, and the figure was everywhere at once, surrounding me, closing in. I ran, but there was nowhere to go. The streets twisted like a maze, the buildings stretched, the air thickened. I realized I had never been outside the influence of the town. Even leaving the motel, even trying to escape, had been a mistake. The town watched, and now it had me. Days, or was it weeks, passed. Time had no meaning. The whispers never ceased. The shadows moved freely, sometimes stretching into shapes I couldn't comprehend, faces forming and dissolving in an instant. I stopped eating properly, stopped trying to sleep, just existing, trying to keep some grip on reality. Then I found the journal, hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the diner, of all places. It belonged to Victor Lane, the previous tenant of the motel. His handwriting was frantic, each word desperate. "The town notices. It waits. It feeds on those who try to leave. The people are hollow, vessels for it. It doesn't need flesh. It needs fear, despair. If you read this, do not try to escape. It follows. Once it sees you, it will never let go." That night, I understood the full horror of Cedar Hollow. It wasn't just haunted. It wasn't just sinister. It was a living, thinking presence. It had no need for bodies. It only needed me to be afraid, and I was. Every second, every breath, every heartbeat was mine to give it. I tried leaving again. I drove, endlessly, thinking I would reach another town, a highway, anything. But Cedar Hollow followed, roads warped, forests pressed in, shadows stretched across the road. I saw the figure in every reflective surface, mirrors, windows, puddles. I felt its gaze in my chest, in my stomach, in my mind. It was patient. I realized then that nothing, not distance, not speed, not reasoning, could save me. The town had marked me, and it would not release me. I moved far away eventually, renting an apartment in a city hundreds of miles from Maine. I thought I was safe. I was not. Shadows appear in the corners of my apartment, too fleeting to capture, too deliberate to ignore. Whispers rise in the silence, sometimes calling my name, sometimes forming strange, ancient sentences. Furniture moves, doors open, objects vanish and reappear. I see shapes just beyond the edge of my vision. I've come to accept a terrifying truth. Small towns like Cedar Hollow don't just hide secrets, they claim people. And if it has seen you, it waits. Patient, inevitable. I live now under that awareness. It will come for me again. It has already claimed me in every way that matters. One day I know I will return. One day I will belong to Cedar Hollow forever. No matter how far I run, I will never escape it. I moved to Red Hollow thinking it would be the fresh start I needed. After years of living in the city, dealing with endless noise, endless people, I craved quiet. Someplace I could think without being pulled in 100 directions. Red Hollow seemed perfect. A town tucked into the hills of Maine, surrounded by forests, its streets small and winding, houses with peeling paint and rusty fences. The population barely reached 600, and the locals were friendly enough to wave as I drove past. But from the moment I arrived, something about the town didn't feel right. I rented a house at the edge of the forest, a small cottage with weathered siding and a sagging porch. The previous tenant, a man named Victor Lane, had disappeared months before. No one would talk about him. I asked around. The diner waitress, a woman named Carol, only shook her head. People leave, some stay. Some don't, she said, her eyes flicking toward the woods. That should have been my first warning. The first few nights were quiet, almost comforting. I unpacked boxes, walked the streets, and tried to settle in. But after the first week, I started noticing things. Small things at first. A shadow where there shouldn't be one. A floorboard that creaked under no weight. The feeling that I was being watched even when I was alone. I chalked it up to the house settling. My imagination running wild, or maybe the isolation. But then it started to escalate. I woke one night to the sound of whispers. I thought it was the wind outside, but it was too deliberate, too close. My name, my actual name, was being called softly, from somewhere in the house. Evan. The voice was faint, almost intimate, and it made my skin crawl. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and scanned the room. Nothing. I checked the windows and doors, locked, silent, yet I could still feel it, eyes on me, patient, unseen. I pulled the blankets over my head, shaking, and prayed it would go away. It didn't. The next day, I tried to find answers. I went to the town library, an old brick building that smelled of dust and mold. The librarian, a stooped man named Mr. Whitaker, was helpful but nervous. When I asked about Victor Lane or the cottage, he froze. After a long pause, he whispered, "Some houses in Red Hollow. They aren't empty. Not really. They don't belong to us. And once you're in them, they notice you. They never forget." I laughed nervously, trying to convince myself he was joking, but his eyes were too serious. That night, the phenomenon worsened. I was in the kitchen, making a cup of coffee, when I saw movement in the reflection of the window. I turned quickly, but nothing was there. The shadows in the room seemed to stretch unnaturally, reaching toward me, curling at the edges. I felt a presence behind me, cold and heavy, pressing into my back. I spun around, empty. My hands trembled and I dropped the mug, shattering it on the floor. Over the next few weeks, the events escalated. Objects moved on their own. My keys vanished for hours, only to reappear on the windowsill. I began hearing footsteps pacing the floor above me when I was alone, the soft scraping of furniture against walls. Once, I swore I saw a figure standing outside my window, tall, thin, motionless, faceless. I closed the curtains, but I could feel it, patient, waiting. One evening, desperate for understanding, I found a small notebook hidden beneath the floorboards in my bedroom. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, as if whoever wrote it was terrified. It belonged to Victor Lane. The entries started normal enough, recounting daily life, but then shifted to terror. They are in the house. I can feel them in the walls, in the floors, watching, waiting. At night they whisper my name. I cannot leave. They follow. They are patient but relentless. Don't come here. Don't stay. If you stay, they will know you. And once they know you, there is no escape. Reading those words, I felt a chill that ran through my body. That night, I couldn't sleep. At precisely 2:47 a.m., I awoke to a whisper, so close it felt like it was in my ear. Evan. The voice was soft, deliberate, echoing in my skull. I turned on every light in the house, shaking, heart hammering. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch, moving against the flow of the light. I tried leaving. I packed my car and drove toward the highway, thinking the open road would break whatever hold the town had on me. But the forest surrounding Red Hollow seemed endless, twisting roads I didn't recognize appearing where there shouldn't have been. Fog rolled in, thick and suffocating, and the shadows seemed to reach out of the trees following. One night, while driving, I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure in the back seat. Tall, black, faceless, impossibly still. I slammed on the brakes. Nothing, empty, but the sense of being watched remained. I began to notice the townspeople behaving strangely. People stared too long, then quickly looked away. Children played alone in empty streets, silent, eyes hollow. Dogs barked at nothing. The town had a rhythm, a pulse, and I was beginning to feel it. It knew me. It had already begun to mark me. One night I decided to confront whatever it was. I stayed up, waiting, listening. At 2:47 a.m., the shadows thickened. Shapes emerged, tall and thin, limbs bending unnaturally, faces black voids with glowing red eyes. They didn't move like humans. They moved in jerks, tilting and stretching in impossible ways. One figure stepped closer, and I felt a pressure in my chest, like ice wrapping around my heart. "You shouldn't be here," it said, and the words resonated both inside my head and around me. I didn't know," I stammered. "You belong," it said. My knees buckled. I realized then that the house, the town, it wasn't just haunted. It was alive. It knew me, and it claimed me. After that night, things changed. I couldn't sleep. Shadows were everywhere, stepping out of corners, reaching for me. The whispers became voices, speaking languages I didn't understand but felt deep in my chest. Furniture moved on its own. Doors opened and closed with a life of their own. I stopped leaving the house. I stopped answering calls. I existed only to survive, waiting for the next night. I returned to the attic repeatedly, drawn by a force I couldn't resist. The notebook lay open, pages flipping as though an invisible hand guided them. New warnings I hadn't seen before. They are patient. They feed on fear. Never look them in the eyes, never speak their name. Once they know you, your soul is theirs forever. And then I saw it, standing in the corner of the attic, black and featureless, yet familiar. It wasn't just outside me. It was inside my mind, twisting thoughts, shaping fear. I could not move. I could not scream. I passed out. Hours later, I woke on the floor, the attic empty, sunlight streaming through the window. I thought it had been a nightmare, but the feeling of being watched remained. I realized then that leaving Red Hollow wasn't enough. The town followed. It didn't need walls, doors, or windows. It could reach me wherever I went. I moved far away, renting a small apartment in the city. I thought I was safe. I was not. Shadows appear in the corners, in reflections, even in dreams. Whispers rise in the silence, calling my name, urging me to return. Sometimes I wake to find doors open that I know I closed, furniture moved. I live with the awareness that Red Hollow hasn't forgotten me, and never will. The truth is simple. Small towns like Red Hollow don't just hide secrets, they claim them. And once the town has seen you, marked you, it follows you relentlessly. You can run, but it waits. Patient, inevitable. One day it will take you back, and there will be no escape. No matter how far I run, I know I will never be free. I never thought a small town could feel so suffocating. I grew up in cities, in places where the streets never slept and the noise was constant. But after my job burned me out and my relationship ended, I needed silence, space, and a life that didn't demand constant motion. That's how I ended up in Hollow Creek, a town so small it didn't even have a stoplight. It was the kind of place where everyone knew your name before you walked into the diner, where the post office still smelled like old paper and coffee. From the moment I drove into town, I felt something off. I chalked it up to nerves. The house I rented was old, a 2-story Victorian with a sagging porch and peeling teal paint. The previous owner, a man named Thomas Bell, had died under vague circumstances, and the locals didn't talk about it. When I asked the real estate agent about the house, he smiled and said, "Some places are best left alone." I thought it was a joke. The first few days were peaceful. I unpacked boxes, walked the streets, and greeted neighbors who smiled and nodded politely, but never lingered in conversation. At night, though, I began noticing strange things. A feeling of being watched, first subtle, then insistent. Shadows seemed to move just at the edge of my vision. Doors I was sure I'd closed were open in the morning. I brushed it off as paranoia. Old houses creak, small towns have eccentric people. I was alone now, and maybe I was imagining things. On the third night, the whispers began. At first, I thought it was the wind rattling the old window frames, but the voice was clear, deliberate. Ethan, it called my name. I froze, my heart pounding. I turned around and the living room was empty. I checked every window, every corner, even the backyard. Nothing. Yet I felt it, something unseen, standing just out of reach, patient and deliberate. I told myself it was stress, lack of sleep. The next day, while exploring the attic, I found a hidden drawer in an old dresser. Inside was a journal, leather-bound, its pages yellowed with age. The handwriting was cramped and nervous. It belonged to Thomas Bell, the man who had died here. At first it seemed like an ordinary diary, but as I read, it grew increasingly disturbing. He wrote about shadows moving independently, whispers that followed him through the house, and a sense that the town itself was alive, watching him. I cannot leave. They know when I sleep, when I eat. I see them in the mirrors, in the corners of my eyes. They are patient, but they will come. Do not stay here. They will take you. I laughed nervously and set the journal down, trying to convince myself it was just the ramblings of a lonely man. But that night, as I lay in bed, I heard it again, closer this time. Ethan. The whisper was everywhere, inside my head and outside, impossible to place. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. I pulled the blankets over my head and prayed for dawn. The days that followed were worse. Shadows began to take form, tall, thin, featureless, standing just beyond the reach of my vision. I would catch them in mirrors or windows, only for them to vanish when I looked directly. Once, while walking through the kitchen, I felt a cold hand brush my shoulder, though no one was there. Items shifted places. My keys disappeared and reappeared on the counter where I hadn't left them. Even the air felt heavier, thicker, as though the house itself was pressing against me. I tried leaving Hollow Creek. I packed the car and drove toward the highway, desperate to escape. But the road twisted unnaturally. Fog rolled in, thick and suffocating, and shadows seemed to stretch across the fields, following me. One night, I glimpsed a figure in my rearview mirror, sitting silently in the back seat, faceless, black, and impossibly tall. I slammed on the brakes, empty, nothing there, but I could feel it, patient, waiting. The locals were no help. Asking about Thomas Bell or the house was met with nervous glances and vague warnings. Mrs. Carlyle, the town librarian, whispered to me in the dusty stacks. "Some of us are marked. Once they see you, you don't leave. The town doesn't forgive. The town doesn't forget." I began to notice patterns. The whispers grew louder at certain times, almost like the house itself had a clock, a rhythm. At exactly 3:12 a.m., shadows pooled in corners, stretching against walls, moving where they had no right to. Faces appeared, half-formed, featureless, watching. I barricaded doors and kept lights on, but it didn't matter. The house, the town, they didn't just feed on fear, they thrived on it. I confronted it one night. I stayed awake, heart hammering, waiting. At 3:12, the shadows thickened, pooling across the floor and walls. A figure emerged, taller than any human, limbs bending unnaturally, face a void except for faint glowing eyes. "You shouldn't be here," it said, in a voice both inside my head and around me at the same time. I didn't know," I stammered. "You belong," it said. Ice ran through my veins. I realized then the truth. The town wasn't just haunted. It was alive, aware, and it had claimed me. The following days were unbearable. I could barely sleep. The shadows were bolder, moving out of corners, approaching me. Whispers became voices, speaking in languages I couldn't understand but felt deep in my chest. Furniture moved. Doors opened on their own. I stopped leaving the house. I stopped answering calls. I existed only to survive another night. I returned to the attic repeatedly, drawn by something I couldn't resist. The journal lay open, pages flipping as though by an invisible hand. More warnings, passages I hadn't seen before. They are patient. They feed on fear. Never meet their eyes. Never speak their name. Once they see your soul, it is theirs forever. And then I saw it, standing in the corner of the attic, black and featureless, yet familiar. It wasn't just outside me, it was inside my mind, twisting thoughts, shaping fear. I could not move, I could not scream. I passed out. Hours later, I woke on the floor, attic empty, sunlight streaming through the window. I thought it had been a nightmare, but the feeling of being watched remained stronger than ever. Leaving Hollow Creek wasn't enough. Distance didn't matter. The town, the shadows, the presence, they followed, patient, inevitable. I moved far away, renting a small apartment in the city. I thought I was safe. I was not. The shadows appear still, in corners, in reflections, in my dreams. Whispers rise in the silence, calling my name, urging me to return. Sometimes I wake to find doors open that I know I closed, furniture moved. I exist under the weight of it, aware that Hollow Creek has not forgotten me and never will. The truth is simple. Small towns like Hollow Creek don't just hide secrets, they claim them. If the town has seen you, marked you, it follows you wherever you go. You can run, but it is patient, inevitable, and one day it will take you. I try to convince myself I'm imagining it, but I know better. Shadows move where they shouldn't. Whispers call my name. And sometimes, late at night, I hear the wind carry it across the hills. Hollow Creek waits, patient and hungry, calling me home. One day I will belong to it. One day I won't be able to resist. No matter how far I run, I know I will never be free. Thank you for staying until the end. Hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more horror.